What if some of the darkest events in human history are the ones most people never learn about? History is often remembered for famous leaders, powerful empires, and great victories that shaped the world. But behind those stories are events so brutal, so devastating, and so deeply human that they are often ignored, hidden, or forgotten over time. These are not just stories of war, but stories of suffering, survival, and consequences that affected millions of people across entire regions. One of these events took place in Central Africa in the late 1800s. The Congo Free State was presented to the world as a project of civilization and progress, controlled by King Leopold II of Belgium. But behind this image, the reality was far darker. Local populations were forced into labor, especially for rubber production, under extreme and often impossible conditions. Entire communities were pushed to their limits as people were required to meet quotas that were nearly impossible to achieve. When those demands were not met, punishments were severe. Villages were destroyed, families were separated, and fear became a constant part of daily life. Over time, millions of people suffered from violence, exhaustion, disease, and starvation. For years, much of the outside world remained unaware of the true scale of what was happening. It was only after reports began to spread internationally that the reality of the Congo Free State became impossible to ignore. But by then, the damage had already been done. And yet, this was not the only time history reached such a level of destruction. In 1850, China was thrown into chaos by the Taiping Rebellion, one of the largest and deadliest civil wars ever recorded. The conflict was led by Hong Xiuquan, a man who believed he had a divine mission to overthrow the Qing dynasty and reshape society. What began as a religious movement quickly grew into a massive uprising, drawing in millions of followers and creating an army capable of challenging one of the largest empires in the world. The war spread rapidly across vast regions, with major cities being captured, lost, and recaptured multiple times. Entire areas were left in ruins as the conflict continued for years. But the fighting itself was only part of the devastation. Famine spread as agriculture collapsed, and disease followed in overcrowded and unstable conditions. For ordinary people, survival became increasingly difficult. Families were displaced, communities were destroyed, and entire regions were left struggling to recover. By the time the rebellion was finally crushed in 1864, an estimated 20 to 30 million people had died, making it one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. Even in the 20th century, new forms of suffering emerged, often hidden behind secrecy and war. During World War II, a secret military program known as Unit 731 carried out experiments that shocked those who later uncovered them. Under the cover of war, human lives were treated as expendable, and science was used in ways that ignored all ethical boundaries. For years, much of the world knew little about what was happening inside these facilities. The secrecy surrounding the program meant that many of its actions remained hidden until long after the war had ended. The scale of what took place remains difficult to fully understand, but its legacy continues to raise questions about the limits of science, war, and human behavior. Not long after, another devastating chapter unfolded in Southeast Asia. In the 1970s, Cambodia was transformed under the rule of the Khmer Rouge. The regime aimed to completely reshape society, forcing people out of cities and into the countryside in an attempt to create a new system. Entire urban populations were relocated, often with little warning, and forced into harsh labor conditions. Families were separated, and daily life became a struggle for survival. Food shortages, exhaustion, and fear became part of everyday existence. Over time, millions of people died as a result of the conditions imposed by the regime. The effects of this period are still visible today, as the country continues to remember and recover from what happened. And not all of history's darkest moments come from war or ideology alone. In 1986, a nuclear reactor exploded in Chernobyl, creating one of the worst technological disasters in human history. The explosion released radiation into the environment, forcing entire communities to evacuate their homes. At first, there was confusion and uncertainty as people tried to understand what had happened. But as the scale of the disaster became clear, the consequences became impossible to ignore. Entire cities were abandoned, almost overnight, leaving behind homes, schools, and everyday objects frozen in time. The long-term effects of radiation exposure affected not only the environment, but also the lives of countless people for years afterward. Even today, the region stands as a reminder of how quickly a single event can change everything. These events were different in time, place, and cause, but they all reveal something important. History is not just about what is remembered, it is also about what is forgotten, overlooked, or never fully understood. Because sometimes the darkest events in human history are not the ones we hear about most often. And that raises an important question. How much of history do we really know?